This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm joined once again by the wonderful Jill Bucaro, who is joining us all the way from Wisconsin right now on her school bus tour of the United States. Jill Bucaro from Wellness Riot. How are you today?
I'm very good. Enjoying Wisconsin.
Superb, superb. Today we are going to be talking about different styles of eating, what would formerly be called diets, I suppose. Diet isn't a term that we tend to use that often these days because it has kind of negative connotations, I suppose. But let's speak a little bit about different styles of diet or different styles of eating.
Yeah. This is a question I get all the time. Like,
Right.
which way should I eat? What style should I use? Like, what's the best? And sometimes it's just the people are just asking for the best in general, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's to address something specific. What's the best diet or eating style for weight loss, or helping me address a particular health condition or
Mhm.
sleep better? So, yeah, I get this question all the time, and there's a lot of different choices. So, some of the more popular diets are paleo, keto,
Yeah.
vegan, Mediterranean. There's lots more, but those are some of the top ones that I think are maybe gaining popularity or are popular.
Right, right. Now, how does one find the perfect style of eating or diet for oneself? I mean, when someone approaches you and said, "How should I be eating?" How do you approach that? Do you have a list of a boilerplate list of questions that you ask them?
I do. And I also, ask them sometimes what they know about the different diets or eating
Right.
styles if they're already doing something. So, for example, paleo tends to be like an ancestral view of eating. So it's, minimal, if no processed foods.
Hmm.
It's very like our ancestor ate,
Yeah.
whole processed or whole unprocessed foods, no dairy, because it's like we didn't have dairy, tens and thousands of years ago.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's very ancestral. Whereas like something like ketotarian or keto is a high fat content diet. And initially that was used for therapeutic reasons for people with like seizures or epilepsy because it was found to help lower the incidence. But people now use it for, standard dieting. But it's basically like 70 to 80% of your diet being fat, and then a chunk being protein and very, very low carbohydrates. So that's keto. Vegan is plant based, so no animal products. And then, there's Mediterranean, which is kind of like healthy oils, lots of plants, some healthy seafood, meat occasionally, some whole grains, things like that. So those are, I like to always just kind of see what people know about the diets or
Hmm.
what they're looking to do. So if are they looking to lose weight? Are they looking for heart health? And then, sometimes I'll match them that way. But the truth is, when people ask me which way to eat, I usually say none. Like if they ask me what the best one is,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
say none, which typically surprises people
Yeah.
coming from somebody, from like the health and nutrition world. But the reason I say none is for two reasons. So, first is that nothing about health is one size fits all. And that is the same with eating styles. Like, I couldn't tell you to eat keto, or I wouldn't recommend vegetarian or paleo for you because I don't really know what's going to work for you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the diet or the style, the eating style that's going to benefit you most may not be the same one that benefits me. So there are some things that benefit most people, and we can talk about that in a minute. But as far as like just a blanket statement, like everybody should eat this way, I just can't say that because health typically isn't like that. The other reason is that there's a lot of variation within any of those eating styles.
I see.
So I'll give you an example with the vegan or the plant-based diet. That's the way I eat. So I will pick on myself. So here's an example, the picture you're looking at, of a really healthy vegan plant-based
Right.
meal. Lots of vegetables, you can see fiber in there, color, nutrients. It's terrific.
Flowers in
Well,
there.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. All edible,
Yeah.
hopefully. And they're plants.
Yeah. Of course.
And then this next picture is also
Oh,
vegan.
okay.
I mean,
Okay.
quite a difference, right? Like no animals were used in the making of that
Yeah.
plate, but you can see there's quite a difference. So if I were just to tell somebody to eat vegan, I mean, that could be from here to here. So it doesn't
Yes.
really
Yeah.
imply anything with regards to health. And I've seen paleo fried chicken, and I've seen keto cheesecake, and I've seen low carb bacon burgers. So that's, those are the couple of reasons that I don't really recommend a particular style of eating.
Okay, so if we were to look at those four different styles of eating, what are the things that we could take away from that? What are the pros and the cons with each of those?
Sure. So paleo, the pros are that it's unprocessed food.
Right.
So you're really eating whole food as it was intended to come from nature, plants, animals, like really kind of as we were designed to eat from an ancestral perspective. So that's a really pro of that. I mean, go ahead.
I have a question. If we're looking back at the way we used to eat back when we were cave persons and things like
Yes.
that, I'm thinking here that perhaps our bodies have evolved to eat the foods that we are eating today, and to go back to that way that we did back then would actually be quite a shock to the system, would it not?
What's so funny you say that is that we have not quite yet evolved to eating the way that we eat. So if you think of like all of human history, the last 100 years is a tiny little sliver, a
Yes.
tiny little sliver of the thousands and hundreds and thousands and millions of years. So our bodies actually haven't caught up to and adapted to the way that we're eating. This is very different eating, processed sugar and artificial additives and preservatives and
Right.
colors and artificial sweeteners and a lot of packaged things and a lot less fiber and a lot less chemicals. Like our bodies haven't adapted to it. So if we went back to how we ate thousands and thousands of years ago, our body would actually be more in tune with that, because that's what we had eaten
Right.
for a majority of our history. So it's a good question, because the way we're eating now, or what's available, I should say, is very regular or normal to us, but our bodies don't think so, because it's really just happened in the past 50 to 100 years where our diets have really changed quite a bit.
I mean, evolution works at a glacial pace. We still have vestigial appendix, right, from the way we once ate way back then, I guess.
Yes, so. Yeah. So it's going to take a little more than 2, 3, 4 generations to get to the way we're eating. And I think our bodies have done amazingly, at adapting, but it's not quite what we should be eating.
So if one were to go through a paleo regime, what are the kind of benefits that people would find from that? And what could be some of the negative effects as well?
Sure. So with any of these, eating styles, I always recommend starting with it as a template. So with paleo, you would eat protein, so animal proteins. You could eat some vegetable proteins. They're not big into like legumes and beans, because that's not something that apparently was, available. Like
that would be pre-agrarian, right? So before they started like planting things like that, I guess.
Exactly. So it was mostly animal proteins, and then vegetables, some fruits, not a lot of grains, if any, even whole grains. So really kind of that animal protein and vegetables is really kind of like the basis. Everything unprocessed, or, as unprocessed as possible.
So where would the fiber be coming from in a paleo diet?
The vegetables.
The vegetables.
So you definitely, okay. Yeah. And I think that's something that you could err on the side of, maybe too much protein, or maybe primarily protein, but really adding in those fibrous vegetables is important, because you're right, there's no fiber in animal protein. And most Americans, most Canadians, most people in the world are actually fiber deficient, not protein deficient.
Yes,
so
yeah.
we can have the protein, but we want to make sure we get those and other nutrients as well from like our greens, our veggies, in addition to the fiber. There's just nutrients and vitamins and minerals that you can get in vegetables that you can't get in animal protein. And so it's a good balance to have both.
Right. Any other downsides to the paleo regime?
I would say just from a personal aspect, maybe some of the foods aren't going to work with you. Some people digest animal protein a little bit differently. Some
Yes.
people digest cruciferous vegetables a little bit differently. Not everybody can process the broccoli and the cabbages and things like that. But like on a whole, I think it's a really solid way to eat, or a really solid idea of a way to eat.
Right.
And then you would just really want to stay in tune with how you feel when you eat certain things. So maybe the salmon is working for you and maybe chicken doesn't, but really kind of just figuring out what works for you individually. The other thing I'll say about paleo is that it's not just a diet. I mean, the idea is like living in an ancestral way. So I know a lot of people that eat a paleo diet, but they sit in front of a screen all day. They're sedentary, they're up all night, like they're in they're not, sleeping and rising with, the sun, they're inside a lot. So it's just interesting. It really should kind of go along with a broader sense of what that means to be outside, to be active, things like that.
Be running about with a loincloth and a club, right? That's
yeah, exactly.
So, silliness aside, moving on to keto. You explained a little bit about keto earlier, but what are the kind of pros and cons of keto? What could, let's say, the average person get from a keto diet, and what would be some of the little kind of foibles that could happen if someone were following a regime like that?
Sure. Well, one of the things about keto is it can be really difficult to follow because it's really difficult to get that much high quality fat and, healthy fat in your daily diet. So as I mentioned, the keto is a high percentage of fat. Now, a lot of Americans, a lot of Canadians, a lot of people in the world have no problem getting that amount of fat. But we're not talking about like refined oils and seed oils and fried foods. We're talking about like coconut and eggs and avocado and things like that, right? So the one thing I'll say about it is it's very hard to stick to, but some of the benefits that people can experience would be a balanced blood sugar. That's some of the benefits. And then, like I said, from a neurological perspective, it was used therapeutically to assist with like seizures and epilepsy and things like that. So that's what I would say with that. And the one other thing I would say is that if you do that, is to get your kidney and your liver checked or numbers checked regularly, because that high of a fat can be pressure and can be taxing on your organs like your liver and your kidney. So I personally wouldn't recommend it for the long term. And I think even really it's just kind of grew into like popularity, say like maybe 3-4 years ago. So really we haven't seen a lot of people on this for a long time, so I just kind of wonder what some of the long-term effects could be, possibly negative. Some of them we know, and some of them we might not, because it really didn't come into existence. Nobody I know, 5, 7, 10 years ago would eat this kind of way.
Now, you mentioned earlier that keto is avoiding carbohydrates basically altogether. So where does one get one's energy from? Is it from those fats, I guess?
Yeah. You can get, fat is fuel.
Yes, yeah.
And protein is a source of fuel. So we don't need carbohydrates. Our body has a way of taking in whatever we're taking in and using it and converting it to what we need. So that's not typically a problem, from a fuel perspective. But I do, wonder and question, like a starchy vegetable, or even, vegetables, like even some non-starchy vegetables have a carbohydrate content. So if people are avoiding that, I don't know what that does. I know a few people that have had digestive upset, when switching to that kind of diet, because they just don't have that fiber and that, to kind of keep things going. When you switch from any kind of diet extremely to another kind of diet, you will probably have, or it's possible to have, some GI distress, because your body gets accustomed to what you take in. So when you just like flip it overnight, your body's like, wait, what is this? How do we deal with this? We're not prepared. We don't have the equipment. So there's always a transition, period, or can be, when you switch from one thing to the next.
Kind of the opposite of gastric distress. But many years ago, I had a very close colleague that I worked with, also called Jamie, who was obsessed with cutting fat out of his diet. and he was a real athletic guy, but he cut out fat completely, and he had to give up eventually because without any fat in his diet at all, it just bunged him up, and his whole gastric tract just basically stopped.
Yeah. I mean, we need fat.
Yeah.
I mean, so, there's all the macro, the carbohydrates, the protein, the fat. You can consider fiber and water in there too. I think everybody's proportion of what they need is a little bit different. I just don't know that cutting out one of those completely, if you didn't have any protein, if you didn't have any carbohydrates, if you didn't have, any fat, that's not what our body is used to. Like our brain is 70% fat, our hair,
Mm-hmm.
our skin, our nails, our hormones, like, is made up of fat. So I just always question, like, totally cutting something
Yeah.
out. And I guess, fat, just like carbohydrate, just like protein, there's not, a one size fits all for that either. Like you can have like a pastry is carbohydrate and a sweet potato is a
Yeah.
carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Very different, and same thing with fat too. So deep fried, French fries are fat, and then an avocado is fat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to plant-based diet. Now,
Mhm.
that's something that you obviously follow yourself, something that is gaining in popularity. And I've definitely, I don't know, over the last 10 years, I still eat a fair bit of meat, but I do supplement that with more and more vegetables and fruit than I perhaps used to.
Mhm.
I actually think if I were to go if you do that sudden switch, I think my body has been so used to getting various nutrients from meat for 50 years, it would
Mhm.
go into some kind of shock if I were suddenly to switch to simply plant-based.
Yeah, I mean, there are benefits from animal-based proteins that you can make up for, you can have and get with the plant-based diet, but you have to really kind of, think it through. And I did it wrong, trust me, for a long
Right,
time. I
right.
was like, why am I tired? Or why am I, well, I was deficient in this. I was, so really, but you have to kind of figure out and do it in a holistic way, maybe a planned way, if it's not something that you've done before. So some
Right.
people are born and raised plant-based, they've got it down, they understand what to do, just like on any one of us that have been raised on, animal proteins and carbohydrates and what, we figure out what works for us. So you can do a plant-based diet, but like I said before, switching
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
abruptly to something might very well give you some issues because your body's not used to it.
Now, what are the rookie's mistakes when switching to a plant-based diet? I mean, the cliche is that, vegetarians and vegans don't get enough protein.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the cliche. But
Yeah.
there are other things that are a little bit more elusive to find in the plant kingdom, right?
Yes. Yes. So I would say the protein is it's part cliche and it can be true.
Right, right.
And there's such a thing called a fast food vegan, right? And we talked last time about the plant-based, the meat alternative.
Yes,
And
yes,
I
yes.
don't know that that's a rookie mistake, but it might be a bridge or a beginner's, like I hate to even say mistake, but move, right? Because you're like, well, what I used to have burgers, I used to have chicken, I used to have, what
Yeah,
do I
yeah, I
have?
agree. Yes, I see. Yeah.
So, and that is not necessarily healthy. So I would say, maybe it's a mistake to think that you can come from one to the other. And a lot of times the basics are the same. So the protein content from a meat alternative will be the same as what it's
Yeah.
trying to imitate. But there's a lot of other stuff that comes along with that as far as like the additives, oil, sugars, sodium, things like that. So that would be one, is like just going from like, trying to replicate exactly what you had in the animal world in the veggie world.
Hmm.
As far as coming from a health perspective. And then I think just having a variety of foods and not overdoing it on the refined carbohydrates. That's a real like easy one to do because you're like, oh, I can have toast and rice and pasta and
Yeah.
bread and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And it's like you could really go like morning to night, not having any animal products, but also not having any vegetables,
Mhm.
just so those are some of the things I would caution against or just be aware. Like plant based really means like, to me is like eating plants. Like that's what it should be.
Yeah.
So tons of vegetables, fruit, and then you can certainly have the whole grains and beans and legumes, and if you want like soy products, whatever, however you want to customize it, but really should be plant centered.
And also with, the rising cost of meat and the like, a plant-based diet is becoming a little more appealing to many people with the kind of well, in the UK they call it the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
A plant-based diet is becoming a lot more appealing for many reasons. I had an ex who I think she was just a vegetarian because she was a little bit thrifty. I hope she never watches this, but
you can edit this.
She was from California as well. Yeah, she was. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Now, the Mediterranean diet is something that I wholly embrace, particularly the red wine part of it.
Yes.
So let's speak about the Mediterranean diet, because that's been since I think it's been since the 70s. People have been talking about the Mediterranean diet and trying to work out how the folks around the Mediterranean could drink so much red wine and olive oil and still be reasonably healthy in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And I think that came into even like a brighter light when the blue zones came out. So if you remember, it was like the areas in the world where they had the people that lived the longest, the most
I'm not familiar with
centenarians.
that at all. Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's called blue zones, and like Sardinia, Italy is one. Loma Linda, California. There's one in Greece, Japan. So there's all these little segments or these little communities around the world where they have found that people live the longest, and not just the longest, but the highest quality of life
Right. Okay.
into their hundreds, right? So the Mediterranean diet was really popular there because a lot of these communities, embraced that. So it's not animal protein free, but I would say in the most situations it's kind of the side dish, on any given plate, or maybe even in any week. So lots of healthy vegetables. There is olive oil, healthy fats, some bread, some grains, some rice. And so
seafood, right?
Yeah, they do have seafood. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's kind of like, in my opinion, a really well-rounded, or maybe like doable is a good word for it for most people. They can have, some animal protein, some fish, some vegetables, some olive oil, that red wine. And I think too, just like anything, it's the quality of the quality of the ingredients versus like what you're just calling it, right?
Yes,
so if you have pressed olive oil from the olives that you can see in your tree, that's much different than like, processed, maybe half olive oil, half corn oil that you would find maybe in a restaurant or something like that. So, and that's really with all of these, it's really the quality of the food that you're eating on your plate versus the ideology of what you're calling it.
I love the whole concept of the Mediterranean diet, because it's so appealing to all of those people in North America and us pale Brits as well. But nobody in the Mediterranean talks about we Mediterranean diet. I think it's like it's a nice kind of sexy selling point. Mediterranean diet.
It does sound like you want to go on vacation and experience that, don't you?
Exactly. Well, I'm going to take what you've said today and kind of think about, from all four of those different eating styles, what I could pick a little bit from. And I'll get back to you next month and tell you how I'm getting along with that.
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds awesome.
Anything you'd like to say in closing, Jill?
Yeah, I just have a few like kind of tips or tricks or something to keep in mind. And one of them is what I kind of mentioned, which is like try, track, and tune in.
Okay.
So like if you're going to use any of these as a template, use it as just that, but be willing to shift and be willing to be flexible. I recommend writing down if you're going to switch to an eating style. I just recommend writing down like what you're eating and how you feel for maybe a couple of weeks to see if you can make any connections. And if we eat something and it doesn't agree with us right away, like, okay, we know that's obvious. But a lot of these different diet trends can have, effects that don't impact you for 12 or 24 hours. So what you eat for breakfast might affect your sleep. Well, you wouldn't know that. It would be hard to make that connection unless you kind of wrote it down and could make, draw some lines. So I just always recommend try, track, and tune in. So you really know if this is maybe the eating style for you, or if maybe the basis is good for you, but you need to make some tweaks. And then the other thing I recommend is cooking at home.
Yeah.
Regardless of what eating style, it's been shown over and over again that almost regardless of what you make, it's healthier at home. It's got more fiber, it's got less sodium, less sugar, less refined oils. So that's just always like a tip that I recommend if you can cook at home. And then finally, just take this in small steps. Just if you want to kind of dip your toe into something, I totally recommend that, and just see how that goes. Take a step, see how that goes, take another step, rather than turning your world upside down. It's not good for your body. It's usually not good for your mental sanity.
Yes.
And so anything that you try, just take it in small steps.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Jill. That was absolutely fantastic. You've given me lots of things to think about once again.
Sure.
Have a great time in Wisconsin, and we will catch up with you again next month.
Sounds good. See you then.
Excellent. Bye for now.
Bye.